Hello, I'm doing this presentation on cultural factors and health disparities in isolated individuals, namely farmers. In a previous presentation done, we talked about mainly some health disparities with farmers and them being isolated, and that geographical location is the main concern really for farmers as far as health-wise. But this is going to dive into a little bit of some of the culture, some of the more of the environment in which farmers reside, and how that kind of works. The media influence of farmers. Farmers are portrayed in different ways, and it can be argued that they're portrayed negatively and positively. In my experience, what I have seen mainly as a portrayal of farmers is negative. There is a big disconnect between urban society and farmers. And understanding what they do. There's about 2% of farmers now in the U.S. 2% of the U.S. population is farmers. And so there is that disconnect now because there used to be so many farmers back then, and they understood, and most people farmed, and now it's shifted. So a lot of people don't realize where their food comes from, or how it's made, or what they do to produce that food, to grow that food, how difficult it is. The resources, the sheer amount of resources it requires to do that. So there is some strange interactions between people that are farmers and people that aren't. So there is, in media, they do tend to portray farmers as rednecks or hicks or inbreds, backwater kind of stuff, or that they're simple and not very intelligent, and that can be damaging to farmers. There's also the media perception that farmers are all capitalists and they're just trying to make money, and which, I mean, yes, they're trying to make a living, but they're not trying to, cheat people all the time. They're not evil. Sometimes that can be farmers can be viewed that way. Not always, and there are some positive portrayals of farmers. Some of them portray as intelligent, hardworking people, kind of the backbone of the country, and without them, we'd be in a tough spot. So it can go either way. As far as the cultural environment of farmers and family support and peers. Family support is a huge thing for farmers, especially when it comes to health outcomes, because family support is generally their entire social circle. That can change depending on the size of the community in which they live, but family support is huge, and so is peers. Peers are a huge support, especially as they share resources and help with whatever they may specialize in. There can be certain skills one farmer has that another doesn't, certain knowledge that they have, certain equipment that they have that they can share. It's all very important to farmers, and they're all a very tight-knit group, especially with those that are in their immediate surroundings, and immediate could be several miles, but family and friends and peers are a huge asset to them. Now, as far as talking about the cyclical vulnerability kind of stuff as farmers, I mean, this population is heavily centered around families, and the cyclical nature of it is that it's family run, and so generally the children of the farmers will kind of take up the mantle and run the farm. Generally, not in all cases, but that kind of tends to be what they do. Cyclical in nature. They all deal with the same stuff. Identical work hazards, family influence and mannerisms. It's all kind of going to be the same. It's all, the same people. They grow up around each other. They learn the same things. They do the same stuff. Now, as far as the legal and political system, this is a very complicated, convoluted system for farmers. I'm not going to pretend to know all of it or any of it or understand how it all works. It's very complicated and over my head most of the time. However, farming is actually quite heavily regulated. It's very intertwined with the FDA and interstate commerce, especially with larger farms. Now, the issue with the political system, and legal system, it can help or hinder the population. It can help buoy farmers in times of financial stress, but it can also keep farmers from growing or making more money and help potentially relieving themselves of debts, improving their situations financially. And one of those things that tends to can be argued as good or bad is marketing quotas. So, for example, marketing quotas can influence dairy farmers. Just an example, if a dairy farmer makes or produces more milk than the government has set that quota for, the government then has that dairy farmer go and dump the rest of that milk, that excess milk. It cannot be used for anything, cannot be sold. It is essentially garbage and wasted. And that is done to control prices of goods. So the farmer could have made a lot of money off of that excess, potentially. You look at supply and demand, they could make something off of it rather than wasting it. But the government does subsidize and pay farmers for that excess. Now, I'm not sure exactly how they work out how much to pay them, things of that nature, but they are given that money to essentially waste it. They're paid to waste those excess goods. And that can go for anything. That can go for almonds, oranges, corn, whatever it is. If there's an excess, it can throw off markets. Allegedly, apparently, that's what the federal government does not want, and so they try to control prices. So, it seems that market prices are artificial for food goods. Anyway, that can be argued as a good thing or a bad thing, and it depends on where you kind of sit on that. If you're a farmer, if you're not a farmer, what your understanding of it is. Another issue that can help or hinder is land rights and acquisitions. This one instance would be more of a hindrance, as there are politicians that are seeking to remove a law that has typically protected American farmers for a very long time. And that essentially deals with inheritance. So most farms seem to be family run. So, if a farmer passes away and their children one of their children takes over the farm, inherits the farm, and then continues to work on that farm, they typically were protected from inheritance taxes to allow them to continue to work and avoid increased financial burden. However, there are some politicians out there seeking to remove this law, and that would open up the gates for farmers who inherit farms to be taxed. And these taxes would be substantial because most large-scale farms are thousands of acres, and the equipment and everything that it takes to run it taxed. So it would be a very detrimental tax to have that law removed. So that would hinder that population. As far as potential barriers, make this population more vulnerable within the larger community, I'm not exactly sure where they would be too vulnerable. I mean, arguments can be made that the U.S. is becoming more secular, and that Christianity could be more criticized. It could also be that argued that families are large families are kind of frowned upon. More people are moving towards individuals, having smaller families just because of strange various thoughts that large families increase the burden on the earth. U.S. farmers are generally, not all obviously, but generally conservative, socially conservative, and so that can be seen as a minority, especially in states where liberal cities with larger populations do tend to have the majority and control most of legislation and how things go. So that can put them at a disadvantage or vulnerability, especially with things like that tax, removing that law that would protect them from inheritance taxes. And then obviously just the main concern would be being geographically distant. That's a vulnerability, just really because they are very invested in what they're doing, and sometimes just really don't pay attention to the world around them. They're obviously in an area where healthcare is lacking, things of that nature. Socioeconomic status, most farmers are middle class, and that is usually due to the overwhelming workload and financial strains, especially with the loans that they need to take to just run a farm. Also, a lot of farmers employ or are illegal immigrants, and therefore they don't make a lot of money, and therefore they're in a lower socioeconomic class, and that puts them at a disadvantage. As far as other health disparities, race, a majority of farmers are white, a majority of farmers are male, a majority of farmers are some form of Christianity. And then as far as bias, everyone has bias. You can see that in the media. Some people view farmers as unintelligent and backwater kind of stuff, while farmers may view others as strange. So everyone has that kind of form of bias. Geographical location, that's the biggest issue, biggest concern for farmers in healthcare. As far as culture, environment, and health disparities in the international scope, this is this is a huge can of worms to get into, but just a little snapshot of things. You can look at India and South Africa. The culture is very different. India, farmers are protesting because of government regulations and what they're doing to control prices. In South Africa, there's a strange culture that is clashing. It can be related to apartheid. A lot of this is just alleged, an alleged increase in homicides. So there is those cultural clashes. So that can be difficult. There are my references. Thank you.